Hello, so my name is James Harrison. I am Professor of International Economic Law at the University of Warwick, and I'm going to talk today about carbon border adjustment mechanisms, or CBAMs as they're known. So CBAMs are a really significant and controversial new trade measure to attempt to tackle climate change. There's going to be lots of discussions about CBAMs in the UK and in trade partners over the next few years. So hopefully you'll find it interesting. And when it comes up in the news in a year or so's time, you'll know what people are talking about. So CBAMs charge a tax on carbon intensive imports such as aluminium, cement, iron and steel for the carbon they've emitted during the production process. The European Union has already introduced a CBAM, and now the UK has announced plans to introduce one too. So what is the rationale for doing this? Well, both the EU and the UK have a domestic emissions trading scheme, whereby they charge domestic companies a tax for the amount of carbon that is produced during production of certain carbon intensive products, including aluminium, cement, iron and steel and fertilizer. So take steel, for instance. Steel is traditionally made in coal-based blast furnaces that are very carbon intensive. Steel sector emissions have averaged approximately 3.7 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide per year since 2019. And this is more than all the passenger cars on Earth. So we need steel production to transition to less carbon intensive forms of production. There are now new forms of furnaces that use less carbon. Charging a tax on carbon emissions in production is intended to encourage steel producers to move to furnaces that emit less carbon to avoid paying those taxes. But an emissions trading scheme imposes a cost only on domestic producers. This can mean that domestic cost of producing goods is higher than the cost of importing goods from countries that do not impose a charge on carbon emissions. This can lead to fears of what we call carbon leakage. So carbon leakage happens in two scenarios. First, when either companies move their operations to avoid paying the taxes, so they move their steel factories from the UK or the EU to other countries to avoid paying the taxes on their products. Or second, consumers can switch from more expensive domestic products which contain domestically produced steel to cheaper foreign products that haven't had to pay those same taxes. In both of these cases, the worry is we haven't tackled climate change, we've just put domestic producers at a disadvantage. So the CBAM tackles this by imposing a tax on foreign imports of carbon intensive imports such as aluminium, cement, iron and steel for the carbon they've emitted during the production process. And this is intended to level the playing field between domestic and foreign producers. So the EU CBAM, which starts fully functioning in 2026, requires importing companies to purchase CBAM certificates to pay the difference between the carbon price in the country of production and in the EU. And the UK government is consulting on some of the details of the UK's proposed CBAM, but it looks like it will be largely the same as the EU, with a few differences in terms of the products covered. For instance, the UK scheme does not cover electricity as the EU one does, and some other technical details. So supporters argue that CBAMs are vital to ensuring that the UK and EU meet their decarbonisation goals, and bringing in an emissions trading scheme without CBAM will lead to carbon leakage. But critics have questioned the CBAM on a number of grounds, including its impact on developing and least developed countries, lack of consultation with trade partners, the complexity of calculating a carbon price, and questions about its effectiveness from a climate perspective. So I understand there's going to be someone else who's going to talk to you about the pros and cons of the CBAM, so I won't go into that in any more detail. Hopefully that quick explainer has given you the basics of how it operates and why it's considered a necessary thing to bring in by both EU and now UK policymakers. So that's all from me today. Hope you enjoy your ongoing discussions, and bye for now.